In this video, we're taking a look at 3 simple DIY projects that were recently featured in the Osborne Builder Studio. If you're interested in a more in-depth tutorial on each of these projects, be sure to check out the links below. For this project, we're using 3 of Osborne's English Country end table legs and oak part 1230 on our website. We're also using Osborne's edge banding and some plywood from a local hardware store. I'll start by measuring and cutting the plywood to an 18-inch by 18-inch square. This will be the diameter of our planter, but this dimension can be adjusted depending on your preference. We can cut this to size on our table saw to get started. Before moving on, I'll check that the cut is square and then use a straight edge to create a mark in the center of the panel. This will allow us to use a compass so that we can make a perfect circle for the base of our planter stand. Next, I can place the anchor point of the compass on the center mark and adjust the width to be flush with the edges of the panel. Once our shape is traced out, we can move to the bandsaw to cut off the corners of the plywood. You can also use a router or jigsaw depending on the tools that you have available. After the profile is cut, you can touch up the edges lightly with a sander to remove any imperfections. Next, I need to mark the circle into thirds since we're only using 3 legs for this planter stand. To do this, start by marking a line in the center of your circle. Next, place the anchor point of your compass on the end of the line, making sure that it's set to the same width as before. Then create a mark where it meets the edges of the plywood. Finally, grab a straight edge and mark a line from the center mark to the edge marks we just created. The top 3 lines now show even thirds for the circle and can be used as a reference for placing your table legs. Next, we can move on to notching the top block of our table legs. I'll measure 5 inches down from the top of the leg and create a line in the center that represents my cut line. I chose to cut this out on the bandsaw as well, but you can use a jigsaw or a table saw depending on what you have available. Now that our table legs are notched, we can place them on the base and mark for the cutouts on our plywood. Notching the plywood base is an optional step, but I do think it helps the overall look of the planter stand. We can line up the center marks of the legs on the lines that we created earlier and trace out the shape of the modified top block. Now that our cuts are made, it's time to assemble the main part of the stand. I'll add some wood glue to the area of the top block that will be in contact with the plywood base. Next, we can place the base on the cutouts that we created earlier, making sure that each leg is seated properly. There may be a little bit of flex depending on the thickness of your plywood, so make sure that everything is square before securing. Next, I'll pre-drill for some wood screws using a 2-step bit into the base of the top block. This will allow us to use wood plugs to hide any attachment points on the top surface of the stand. Depending on the table leg that you choose for your project, be sure to use a proper length screw to avoid splitting the table leg. Next, I want to add some 1x material to the underside of the stand to remove any flex in the plywood. I need to cut the middle angle of these boards to 30 degrees since we're only working with 3 table legs. The length will be determined by the diameter of your base and the size of your table legs, so be sure to take accurate measurements before making cuts. For one of the boards, I chose to create a notch that will accept the other 2 boards just to make for an easier installation. Just make sure all of these angles are cut to 30 degrees for a proper assembly. You can see here how the support structure will assemble on the underside of the stand. Next, I'll add a pocket hole on the square end of the boards that we'll use to attach this to the top block. We'll add some wood glue to the boards in the areas that touch the base and place the boards in their proper location. Now that our planter stand is assembled, the final step is to add edge banding to the plywood edges. You can easily cut the edge banding to length using scissors and apply to the plywood edge using a hot iron. Once the edge banding has dried, you can trim it to size using a razor blade or a sharp chisel. You can lightly sand the plywood top to make sure that the edge banding is flush with the surface. Whether you're building a craft table or a large dining table, our custom table base kits come with everything you need to build a solid table that's perfect for any space. These kits come with all of the necessary hardware for assembly and can be customized with the table leg of your choice. For this project, we chose the Portsmouth end table leg, part 1204 on our website. This is a 21-inch end table leg and is the perfect height for this kid's craft table. I'll start by assembling the pre-cut mortise and tenons for each leg and secure them using the supplied fastener. I'll repeat this process for all 4 sides of the table base before moving on to the next step. Next, we can install the corner blocks to each corner of the kit. I find it easiest to loosely install the hanger bolt before adding the pre-drilled pocket screws. Then you can tighten it down with a 1/2-inch wrench and really pull the table together at the corners. Once the table is assembled, we'll add a quick coat of paint before moving on to the next step. As I mentioned, for this project, we're using a repurposed hickory tabletop from an old piece of furniture. This makes for a great top for our craft table, as hickory is very durable and this table will likely see some wear over the years. I chose to go with a 1-inch tabletop overhang on this table, but this is something you can customize when you order your table base kit from Osborne. Just let us know your desired dimensions for the project and we can create the perfect fit. The final addition to this project is some built-in storage underneath. I picked up these hanging shelves online and I think they'll be a great option for some storage for this table. I'm going to add one on each side, so I'll start by finding the center of my table base kit and lining that up with the center of the shelf. Then I'll make some reference marks and flip it around and install using the supplied hardware. Depending on your tabletop, you may want to pre-drill in this step to avoid cracking or splitting the top. Just be sure to use a drill bit that is slightly smaller than the screw that you're using for an easy installation. I'll repeat this process for the remaining shelf and we can take a closer look at our finished craft table. To get started, I'll cut a 45-degree bevel on one end of the molding stick and measure out 36 inches for my next cut. The overall dimensions for this project at the base are going to be 36 inches by 12 inches just to keep everything uniform. When cutting crown molding, be sure to keep the flat side in contact with the miter table and the miter fence at all times. Crown molding profiles can have various angles that can cause the saw to jump or skip, so be sure to keep a firm grasp on the board at all times and use clamps when available. Now that we have our molding pieces cut to length, we can get a better idea of the overall design of the table riser. Next, we need to create the interior frame that will add some support to the piece and give us a surface to install our floating top onto. The 1x2 framing will install onto the back of the crown molding and have a matching 45-degree miter that will allow for an easier glue up of both pieces. Once our interior framing is cut, we can make sure the miters line up properly before installing onto the back of each piece of crown molding. I'm installing the 1x2 framing flush with the angle on the back side of the crown molding. This will give us about a 1/2-inch groove that will accept the floating top that we're going to be installing later. To attach these two pieces, I'll use some wood glue and a brad nailer, making sure that the miters line up properly on each piece to avoid any issues during our final glue up. Once the framing is attached, we can add some wood glue to each corner and use a small brad nail just to keep everything clamped together while it dries. It's important to make sure that all of your miter and bevel cuts line up during this step to avoid any issues when installing your floating top later on. For this top, we're using a piece of 3/4 inch plywood as the base. This will have a slight reveal between the top of the crown molding and the top of the table riser, but if you wish to have something more recessed, you can use a thinner plywood for your top. To attach the plywood to the fabric, we'll be using this quick set spray adhesive. You can spray a coat on both the fabric and the plywood and let it sit for 1 minute before attaching the two.